Hello, my name is Romy Gutierrez. I'm the director of the University Press of Florida, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Our second panel for today, Career Paths in Humanities, Public Engagement, and Publishing, is part of a virtual event series made possible by Sustaining the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We would like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities for its generous support. We would also like to thank our event partners at the University of Florida, the African American Studies Program, the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere. And now a few pointers and guidelines for this panel. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel, Florida Press. Registrants will receive an email with a link to the recording. If you did not get a chance to attend the presentation we hosted this morning, which was a discussion of the book publishing process in detail from the perspective of authors and editors, you will be able to access that recording as well on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning has been enabled. To view the closed captioning, please click on the closed caption in your meeting controls. If you have a question for the panelists at any time, please put your question in the Q&A box. We will do our best to address your questions throughout the panel as time allows. I would now like to welcome our panel moderator, Dr. Barbara Mennel. Barbara is the Rothman Chair and Director for the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere at the University of Florida and Professor of Film Studies and German Studies at UF. Her most recent book is Women at Work in 21st Century European Cinema, published in 2019. She has two books forthcoming, one on the experimental filmmaker Sue Frederick in September 2023 with the University of Illinois Press's Contemporary Film Director Series, and another on the German 1931 film Girls in Uniform, to be published in 2024 in the British Film Institute Classics Series. Thank you, Barbara.
Welcome, and we're gonna start and jump right in with our panelists. So if the panelists could turn on their cameras, that would be great. And then I will introduce them very, very briefly, and each of them will speak for 3 to 4 minutes about their background and their career trajectory. And we're going to start with Timothy Barber, who's the director of the Meek-Eaton Black Archives Research Center Museum at the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. As stated, my name is Timothy Barber. I'm the director of Meek-Eaton. My path to being in the field of humanities as well as archives and museums started right after I graduated, actually, probably before, as a student here at Florida A&M University, where I studied history and had the opportunity to intern here at the Meek-Eaton Center, Carnegie Library, some time ago. And this was prior to my receiving an internship for the Black Archives History Research Foundation in Miami, of which I am a Miami native. And I was unaware that a Black archive existed in Miami. So when the professor was telling me that there was a Black archive, I was like, oh, really, where? So, I did an internship there, and that was back in 2003. Telling my age a little bit, but I'm quite sure the grades are doing that as well. But so the opportunity to intern there was phenomenal. I learned so much, was able to intern there as well as do some studies at the Georgia Archives, and really get engaged with the community aspects of archiving, because the archive there was a community archive started by Dr. Dorothy Jenkins Fields in 1977, where she began to collect the stories of people of color, because the main library was not doing that. So this was very important for Miami. As we know, Miami, may or may not know, Miami was incorporated by Black men, and it was early 1896, which was right after the Plessy-Ferguson decision. Shortly after Black men voted to incorporate the city of Miami, the Jim Crow kicked in with the Plessy-Ferguson decision, and it disenfranchised Blacks from voting. Working there was phenomenal, learning the experiences, getting plugged in with the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as well as the Association of African American Museums, led me to becoming a director in 2009. It was a nonprofit organization, which we know nonprofits funding is very limited. Missed a lot of checks, paychecks that is, but was able to persevere, became the director, and was able to build that institution with my colleagues down in Miami, which led me back here to Florida A&M just about 6 months in as the director here. So after spending 20 years in Miami, I'm here at Florida A&M University and looking to do everything, replicate everything I did in Miami with getting into the digital field. 2009, we started digitizing in Miami and we did not look back. So we're looking forward to doing that here at Florida A&M, and I'm gonna keep what I'm saying short. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And we'll come back with questions that maybe dig some deeper in what you presented. But our next speaker is Jenna Kolesari, and she's the Academic Promotions Manager at the University Press of Florida.
Thank you, Barbara. Hi, as she said, I'm Jenna Kolesari, and I'm currently the Academic Promotions Manager at the University Press of Florida. I got my PhD in cognitive psychology from the University of Notre Dame I graduated in 2018. My path to where I am now was kind of a little bit messy. I think some people's are. So my very last year in grad school, I started working as an intern at the University of Notre Dame Press. So I highly recommend, if you're interested in publishing, to intern at a press. It's one of those things that I feel like you can't really get the experience if you're not like on the ground getting the experience. So I worked as an intern during my last year in grad school. I was kind of considering other opportunities, and I was really lucky that my advisor was really supportive of that. And then Notre Dame had a very unique opportunity where if you got your PhD in 5 years in the humanities or social sciences, they would fund like 1 year of postdoc, and you could do kind of a variety of different things. And so what I did with that is I worked as an assistant acquisition editor at the University of Notre Dame Press. And there would have been a teaching assistantship component, but I was hoping to spend more time at the press. So we kind of worked around it. And what I did instead is I managed all of our undergraduate interns at the University of Notre Dame Press. So I kind of went from being an intern to managing the interns, but it was kind of nice because I remembered that experience. I remembered what would be helpful. And so I was there for about 1.5 years at that point. The 5+1 postdoc position ended, but they were kind of in transition hiring for other positions. So I stayed on for another 5 or 6 months, although I was pursuing university press opportunities in other places at that time. And so I applied for originally an acquisitions assistant role at the University Press of Florida. And I wasn't able to get that job, but then they posted a marketing position a while later, and I hadn't considered marketing, but I was like, oh, I really liked the people that I talked to at the University Press, and I think, it would be a good opportunity. So I came here in October of 2019 as the exhibits coordinator in marketing, and turns out I love marketing. So I've been here ever since, and now I am academic promotions manager, which means I deal a lot with our academic titles. So I still manage, our conference presence. I send our academic books to awards for societies. I write copy for our academic titles. I send out lots of emails. Basically make sure that the right scholars are seeing the books that are in their field. So thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Ana Menendez, an associate professor at the Wolfsonian Public Humanities Lab and Department of English at Florida International University.
Hello, thank you, Barbara, and thank you all. It's very nice to be here, even virtually, with everybody. So my career path, such as it is, Jenna mentioned hers was messy. I think a lot of them are, especially these days, especially in the humanities. Part of it is what kind of people are drawn to this work. We tend to be, maybe curious and restless and all of those other things. And so I've had a very varied path. I Tim, since we're aging ourselves, I'll also say that I graduated with a bachelor's in English in 1992. And that was a time of also the beginning of the crisis of the humanities, where people wondered what you were going to be able to do with these degrees. But I knew that that was the only thing that I wanted to do, was to tell stories and read stories. And so I applied for a clerkship at the Miami Herald, and I got it. And that set the beginning of my career, right? I got to tell stories and get paid for it. I learned how to write. Journalism was a great way to learn how to write. And then, you know, halfway through it, a couple years into it, I got bored, tired, burnt out, and I did an MFA at NYU in creative writing. And my thesis in that program became my first book, Kid I Was a German Shepherd, which was published in 2001. And from then I just, you know, continued to balance these two careers of journalism and fiction writing. And along the way, I got to do a bunch of stuff. I'll keep it short, and we can talk a little bit more later. But I've lived overseas for most of my adult life. So I lived 3 years in India, where I was a freelance photographer and a freelance writer as I was getting my MFA, and then moved back to New York, wrote some more books. Then I moved to Istanbul, wrote another book. Then I decided I wanted to come back to journalism for a little bit. It's been long enough that I'd forgotten what it was like. And I was a columnist for the Miami Herald for 3 years. And then I got bored of that. And I got a Fulbright to Cairo, and I spent a year in Cairo. And then from there, I went to Amsterdam and then Maastricht. I started a creative writing program in Maastricht, which was a wonderful, great university and a great place to work and a great town. And then we moved back to Miami. I did a couple of visiting writer gigs here and there, kept writing some books. My fifth is coming out in the summer. And then I got a job directing a wonderful Mellon grant here at FIU. It was an incredibly creative time of my life. I didn't do any writing. I did do a lot of creating. And then in 2020, just as the pandemic hit and the lockdowns hit, I joined the faculty at FIU, which has been absolutely wonderful. And it's given me my summers back to continue to write. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so our next speaker is Kiara Thompson. She's the Assistant Director of the Sankofa African American Arts and Digital Humanities Initiative, a graduate of the University of Florida's African American Studies program, and a former student assistant through the support of the National Endowment for the Humanities at University Press of Florida.
Good afternoon, everybody. And as she mentioned already, I am a graduate of the African American Studies program here at University of Florida. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about my role that I serve in currently as the Sankofa African American Arts and Digital Humanities Initiative Assistant Director. The short for our organization name is SADI, which means bliss and happiness. And basically SADI is a organization that partners with University of Florida professors and the University of Florida professors in the African American Studies program and the African and African American History course at Eastside. And basically we've been collaborating to bring students to UF campus and exposing them to marginalized spaces such as the Institute of Black Culture and the African American Studies program. We've also exposed them to different resources that are available to them, such as the Samuel Proctor Oral History program. And through their exposure to that, we actually work with students to create a podcast where they were able to talk about the local unsung heroes of Gainesville. And that was just an amazing experience. And it's been great. And I think that it's important also to talk about how I sort of got there. Originally, I received this position after I started a student-led organization at University of Florida with a few other people. It's called Sankofa Society. And we ended up partnering with this other organization wanting to bring students to UF campus And once we partnered with them, the director of the project asked me if I would like to continue working with them. And so that's how I got introduced to SADI. And we're still working now to just expose students to the humanities and let them know that there's still that, I would say, let them know that education, higher education is a very diverse place, and that there's not one single avenue that you can go down or into. We've also brought UF professors from African American Studies to ESide and allowed them to share their research with the students, and allow students to sort of have a conversation and a discussion about important topics that are going on. We've also, another role that I serve in is as a content tutor for the University Athletic Association. And I work with the student athletes with content specific material as it relates to African American studies, and just making sure that they understand curriculum and what's going on. And that is my spiel. Thank you all for having me here today. I am a little nervous, but I'm gonna push through.
Okay, you're doing great, and thank you for being here. So our last speaker is Pam Schwartz, who's the Executive Director of the Orange County Regional History Center and the Historical Society of Central Florida.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Everybody's lovely and doing a great job. And thank you for having me. You know, I'm maybe a little bit outside of the regular roles for this. I'm a longtime museum professional. I've been in museums since I was 14 years old, but I've kind of touched in all the humanities. So we talk about, I really like what Anna said about being curious and restless people. So I've kind of touched the humanities in a lot of ways. So I was an avid art student, and my bus driver asked me if I wanted to work on a mural with him. And I'm like, what? My bus driver is like this amazing artist. And he sent me to the local historical society to do research on my tiny little blue collar town in Iowa. And I was so enthralled looking at these historical photographs of this community. I'm like, this is not where I live. What is this? This is really interesting. And so she offered me a job, and I've been in museums ever since. I did start school actually as a music major. I'm a bass trombonist. And I was like, this is a bad idea. I shouldn't be doing this. And I wanted to go into history, and my dad's like, that's not a real thing. So I went into public relations, figured it'd be useful, right? Anywhere. And through a journalism class, actually did an interview with one of the people at the university museum. And she's like, oh, you've been in museums? Do you want to do our internship? And I was like, oh my God, that's like a real job. Like, that's a thing I can do, is be in, like, I love that. I should just do it. So again, I've been in museums ever since, and I've been everywhere from a one-room schoolhouse in Maine on up to the British Museum of London. I've filled every role. I've had so many internships. My master, I had been through so many internships. I'd learned as much about what not to do as to do. So I wanted to go to grad school to like learn the proper theory. I'd had all the practice. So I went to grad school at Seton Hall, one of the oldest museum studies programs in the nation. And I really learned a lot about, again, what to do and what not to do. And my master's thesis was actually written on standards and best practices and internships and volunteer programs for museums, because I had seen a lot of abuse and what internships shouldn't be in terms of gaining qualified experience and setting you on these career pathways. And really like giving you an experience that then makes somebody want to hire you, not just coffee and copies, right? So worked in a lot of places. Right out of grad school, I got my first directorship, which I was surprised. I was like, I'll apply for this. They're never going to hire me. And they did. So I ran 4 museums in the Midwest. Before coming here to Central Florida, I came here in February of 2016 as the chief curator, overseeing our collections and exhibitions, the fun stuff, the content department. We build the exhibits and we take care of all the historical objects. And then I became the director a bit ago, 2 years ago or something like that, maybe, and have been doing that. And so our museum here covers the Central Florida region of history, 7 counties, 14,000 years, just a few things that we talk about. I'm also the editor-in-chief of our historical magazine. If you've never seen it, you can check it out on our website, but we publish this twice a year, has a lot of really great historical articles. So I fill, a lot of hats, but we've done a lot of work here in the last 6 or 7 years to become a better museum. Museums across America haven't always been great in terms of the stories they tell. They've not been reflective of their entire community's experience. And so we've really focused on decolonizing and fixing ourselves. Some things have happened to us and some things we've sought out. Some of the things we're, I think, most noted for the last several years, we're now a 21-time nationally award-winning museum. Our work around the Pulse nightclub shooting and collecting the material memory and working with our community, doing oral histories after that. Oral history is my favorite thing, maybe ever. Next, well, that and genealogy are my two big things, and they both go hand in hand with the humanities and museums. And then also our landmark exhibition on the Ocoee Massacre, which, if you're not familiar, was a racial terror massacre that happened here a little over 100 years ago. If you've heard of Tulsa or Rosewood, this event happened prior to both of those. So those are a few of the things we've worked on amongst many, but it's been a lot of museums in a lot of different ways, but really centering my experience around the humanities and bringing them to the community and using them for education, healing, driving change, all those things.
Thank you for this great introduction. So what I would like to do next is actually follow the same order and ask one question that is a follow-up question to your introduction, and that is meant as a kind of practical advice to those undergraduate or graduate students who are listening. And so for Tim, I wanted to ask whether, if there is a student out there who would be interested in working in African-American cultural context, whether it's archives, museums, or what else, what advice would you have where to find this? I know it mentioned the Association of African American Museums, but what are other approaches that you could help students who are looking for sort of a specific cultural context?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is to, really dive into the minds of your professors and your cultural locations on campus. Because that's a wealth of knowledge. Like I said, I wouldn't have known about the Black Archives in Miami if I did not one day walk into the archives here on campus, and find out about it. Beyond that, you have ASALH, Association of Study of African American Life and History. You have BTUs at most PWI institutions, a lot of times Black student unions, and things of that nature. But just plugging in. It's one thing I would definitely say, plug in. Many people start with your own history. You start with your family history. What was, sometimes you don't take the time to talk to your grandmothers or your moms and fathers and grandfathers that are living, just to find out more about who you are. I remember one day I just happened to ask my great aunt, hey, when I started working at the Black Archives, when did you guys move to Miami? I thought they moved to Miami in the 60s and 70s. No, we moved to Miami in the 1930s. I was like, wow, I had no idea. Where did you live? We lived in Overtown, which is the historic Black neighborhood in Miami. And I would have never known these things if I did not take that opportunity to just indulge and find out. So I really encourage students to really find out about your own history. Look at your genealogy and touch with your professors. Find out what makes things move, and volunteer at these institutions. That's really, I'm glad to hear Ms. Swartz say, what she did at 14 years old. That was powerful, So volunteer. That's the suggestions I can give to upcoming students.
Jenna, in your story of your own development, I was struck by the fact that you started where you studied, but then went national. And so I wondered whether you would have advice for students who are thinking about, should they start looking regionally or can they look nationally from the outset? How was that for you, and what do you think, looking back, how would you advise to students who are looking both for internships and for work?
So for internships, I would definitely say look regionally, look where you are. I mean, at the time that I started working at Notre Dame Press, I wasn't in a position to leave Notre Dame because I was still finishing the dissertation and doing other things there. So I couldn't have had an opportunity elsewhere at that moment in my life. And I made some great connections with the editors there. I really, really enjoyed it. But when I started looking for a job, I think you can look more nationally, more globally, we always say in the university press world specifically, it's a small world, you think it's a big world, but it's like, oh, my editor knew that editor knew that editor, and there are all these connections. So actually, the editor that I worked with at Notre Dame used to be at UPF way back in the day. So like, he was able to like, give me some connections and things like that. So I think, especially if you're still committed to other things, like if you want to volunteer, if you want to intern, if you want to like get the experience, that's so great. And I think it's, at that moment in your life, it's probably better to be regional, if you have other commitments going on, you're going to school, you're doing other things. But if you're ready to commit to doing it and you're willing to, move or relocate or whatever, I think you can look more nationally. But definitely if you're looking at like the internship level, look where you are, and there should be plenty of opportunities.
Thank you. Anna, you started out by saying, it would be different today, but then you told us this very rich, colorful story of your life. So I wondered what you think is the difference to students starting out today with the same interest that you have had so many years ago.
Yeah, so many. I think the biggest difference is the decline of especially regional newspapers, which were such a rich source of instruction and just training for so many writers. And so I think that's one of the biggest changes. The other one is this decline in the enrollments in the humanities, which was already happening when I went away to college in 1988. And already, the business majors were on the rise and all of that, and people wondered what you were going to do with this English degree. And so those pressures have only increased, I think. But the lesson that I would like for students to keep in mind is that a humanities degree gives you so much in terms of how to respond to the world and how to move in the world. And one of the things that we learn in the humanities is how to take huge amounts of information and make sense of it, draw conclusions. And even with the rise of AI, there is AI is based on some really specific data sets that don't necessarily include all of our voices or all of the international voices. And so the individual experience is still so important. And I'm so grateful for my humanities degree because it gave me that very broad base, which I could then jump off and do a bunch of very interesting things. I'm so grateful for the great privilege that I've had to be able to move from job to job, which not everybody can do, right? But to be guided by my interests, and that's been a huge gift of the humanities. And I just want to also add, something that Tim said about volunteer, and I think, along those lines, be of use. It's easy to get caught up in, I want this and I need to do this and this is where I want to go. And, take a moment, step back and see what the world needs and how you can help to make it better, to make it more whole and make it more inclusive.
Okay, thank you. Kiara, I have many questions for you, but I'm going to boil it down to one since you are the youngest here. And I think people might also be interested in what you actually do on a daily level. And you talked about the collaboration between Eastside, which is the Eastside in Gainesville, and I assume you mean the school there. But I'm also interested in the digital aspect of your position that's in the title. So if you could tell people who are here a little bit about what your job entails now on a daily basis, that would be great and helpful.
So on a daily basis, my job as a SADI assistant director would be connecting with first the Alachua County social studies curriculum director. So he's like over all the curriculum, coordinating with teachers at Eastside, such as Ms. Lyons and Ms. Armstrong, collaborating with Dr. Ken, and then sort of collaborating with them, connecting with them, and then figuring out what we want to do, and then, no, I feel like I did not answer that question well. Digital, in the digital also, to digitize things. Hold on a second. My day-to-day, like I said, it is connecting and collaborating with those individuals. And then on the back end, right, we're moving into a world that's very digital, and people want access to it, right? And the internet is our friend, and it's meant to be a resource, right? And so digitizing these oral histories and different experiences that people are having, and digitizing these stories and bringing it to digitizing the stories to be able to bring it to the public and create access. I'm sorry. I don't know if about that.
You're doing great. I mean, I feel like it just shows how hard it is to talk about what we actually do. While we're doing it. So please don't worry. I think you're giving us a good idea of what is happening. I mean, like really, what we're trying to get at is like, what are the jobs that people then get in the humanities, and how did their education prepare them? And then it sounds like you're doing a lot of things by bringing together humanities and scholarship, creating curriculum, but also digitizing it for new use. So this is what I heard, and I hope I heard it right.
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to turn to Pam, and something I heard in Pam's introduction that I also heard in Anna's was that you actually decided to get the formal education for your job relatively late. And I wondered whether you could speak a little bit about that. So, you know, in your profession, do you see that that's still possible? Is this something, would you do it differently if you could now? Sort of just reflect on what does that mean to decide much later that now you're getting the degree that we would all assume you actually have to get at the beginning.
Well, actually, that's not quite how it happened, because I started in museums when I was so young. By the time I was going to undergrad, I'd already had 4 to 5 years of like actual gainful museum experience. And I was a paid employee. I wasn't even an intern. Like my first job was a paid I was like the weekend curator as a 14-year-old essentially. And I got through undergrad, and I applied for grad schools, and I didn't get it. Well, let me rephrase that. I applied for one grad school and I didn't get in. And that was the first time I'd not gotten into anything. And it was so devastating, but I put all my eggs in a basket and I'd like kicked it across the farm. I was so devastated to have not, because this program only accepted like 11 people. And I went to the director of my museum at that time, and I was like, I don't know, crying or something. And she's like, you don't need that. She goes, go work, make sure this is even what you want to do. And I'm like, I've been doing it for like eight years at this point. Yeah, it's what I want to do. And she goes, just go get experience. It's important to do that. You can do school later. So I took 1 year off. I had a position that I held with, I would say, not good mentorship and leadership. And I was like, yep, I need to learn how to actually do this job so that I can provide better experiences for my staff someday and better experiences for my interns than what I've experienced. So I only took a year off between undergrad, which I'd actually, I guess, graduated a little bit early, and then went to grad school at Seton Hall. So I went right away. But the difference that was kind of unique for me was that going into grad school, even at like the normal age for going into grad school of like, if you go straight through that progression, not that there's any normal age, I don't mean to say that, but I already had like 8 or 10 years of experience. And so I'm sitting in classes with people at the same age, but having like just a deeper well of knowledge, which was actually great for me because I could have a different kind of conversation with my professors and my mentors, right? Where some people are like, oh, like, I don't know how it works to work with a board. And I'm like, I'll talk to you about working with board members. I have feelings. And, you know, so it was just a little bit of a dynamic experience, but it was actually really nice that I could share some of my experiences with my fellow students. And I think what's important is that it's never too late to go back. I thought I'd have my PhD by now. I was going to do that by the time I was 30. I got so busy like just working that I haven't done it. Someday, maybe I'll do it. What one of my former bosses says is, you've got your PhD in experience, which is, you know, kind of true. It's like living it all the time. But I think there's no one way to attack getting into this. And I was fortunate because I found it early. So I got to do internship after internship after internship. And I recognize that that's not something that's accessible to everyone. I was really fortunate to find paid internships, but I also went to them. Like I just picked up and moved to Maine for like a $700 internship. Like I didn't even pay for the gas to get out there, but like I was like, I'll eat bread all summer long just to have this experience, which is a little bit part of a problem in humanities and nonprofits museum field and has been, which is why now adult me is insistent that we start creating paid internship opportunities that create gainful experience and employment for everybody, because our field has not been diverse enough because it has been one of privilege, quite frankly. And I had very, a family who was able to support me and things, so it wasn't always easy. But I did have that. But what we are doing, we have multiple paid internship experiences, one right now featuring women's history. It's called the Her Story Women in History Internship, currently on our website. Check it out. We're taking applicants, but we're trying to endow these internships so that they will always be paid and they will always be present, so that anyone can be able to work and get actual real experience in a museum to explore archives work, education, informal education, exhibitions, development, whatever that is. So my experience really led me to this path to like the types of experiences I'm trying to create today. But it's never too late to have an experience. It's never too late to go for something that may feel, quote, non-traditional. Because listen, it's your future. There's a lot of opportunities. Just go for the thing that makes your heart sing.
Thank you. So you kind of drifted. Maybe you saw the question that somebody asked, do you have any advice for people who may not have the financial means to complete volunteer work or unpaid internships? So you drifted into the answer, but is there somebody else who would like to just speak to that question for those who don't have the means to do an unpaid internship or volunteer work? Does somebody want to add to this?
I can speak to that for just a minute. I know that there's a big push, at least in the university press world, to offer like more and more paid internships, to offer remote internships, to kind of increase the opportunities we're giving to students and making sure that like, a variety of students can do them, and it's not limiting. But if you're not able to do a full-on internship, my advice would be set up informational interviews with people doing the work, with people in the field. You can be making those connections. You can be, asking those questions. What does your day-to-day life look like? And then think about, is this something that you want to pursue? So you can be, gathering all this information, making these connections, finding people in the field who want to kind of help you get into it. All without, doing an actual internship if you don't have the time, if paid internships aren't offered where you want to do. I would say definitely reach out to people in the field, because in my experience, they're almost always willing to talk and to help and to like help you make other connections that you need to make, and to just share their information and their experience.
And we do have a follow-up question for you, Jenna, that has been sitting around for a little while. And that is that a person who asked noted that you have received a degree in cognitive psychology. If you could speak to the switch to the press and the humanities.
Yeah, I can. So unlike Pam, I did not find what I wanted to do that early. I went to undergrad, and I was, very lucky in that, my parents said, study what you want and you'll figure out what you will do later. And I was like, cool. So I did. I studied psychology, and then I was like, oh, I still don't know what I want to do. So I went to grad school. So I was fortunately or unfortunately, like I didn't go to grad school with, high dreams of like academia and being a professor. I kind of went to grad school because it was the next logical step, and I wasn't really sure what other steps were available. And then during grad school, like I said, I started interning at the press. And one of the big things that kind of drove me away from like academia and psychology and more into the press is that I feel like, when you're doing research, especially in, science or social science, it becomes so narrow. Like my dissertation is one of those things that I'm like, there's like 2 other people in the world that care about this. And it's like the smallest minutia, which is, great and important. But I was like, I want to read about everything. I want to read about like the archaeology they're doing in, so-and-so. And I want to read about James Joyce, and I'm just naming our subject areas now, but I just like, I was so curious and I really just wanted to learn, which is, kind of what led me to grad school in the first place. And so once I, started kind of looking at other opportunities and looking at the press, I was like, oh, they get to work on such a variety of subjects and really be like involved in such a variety of subjects that there's so much more like to the person who's curious and just like, wants to know about, everything and like for sure not be an expert in everything, but just like is really looking for broader information. It was a really good switch for me in that way. So I really like being able to kind of, like she said, curious and restless. I didn't want to do one thing. I wanted to do lots of things and to learn about lots of things. So that was kind of what drove me over to the press.
Thank you. There was a question for Pam. You talked about not having great mentorship early in your career. What qualities do you think make a great mentor and leader in the workplace? And I wanted to add a really basic practical question for students. What do you do when you're in a bad internship? I mean, if anybody else has advice here, how do you identify what is good and what is bad for an internship? And what do you do when you're actually stuck in a bad one? And I'm going to ask Pam first to talk about this, and then maybe we can open this up.
Yeah, I think I want to be super clear that I've had great mentors and I've had not great mentors, and I have learned equally from both of those experiences. And it's because I chose to learn from it instead of, I'm not saying that there's not bad experiences you need to bail from, because that does happen, unfortunately. I think that like in terms of a good mentorship, right, is good communication and realistic expectations about what we're both contributing to the relationship and what we're both taking away from the relationship. Mentorship should be mutually beneficial. It shouldn't just be somebody giving to their mentee. The mentor can also take a lot from learning and educating. I like, my niece is 20. I learn from her every day. I'm only 35. It's not like, we're so far apart, but we can learn from each other. So I think that if you're in a bad experience and it's not like an atrocity, it's just like, this person is a mess. Like I'm making a lot of copies. To see what you can learn about that. Observe other people. If you have an advisor, speak to your advisor about that. If you're in the school atmosphere, if you're in a really bad situation, you're being asked to do something unethical, whatever, walk away. Right? Do not compromise yourself. Do not compromise yourself personally or professionally to stay in this because I've got to have credit or I've got to whatever. Maybe somebody will say that that's bad advice, but that's my advice, is that deep down, you've got to stick to what you believe in, and you should never compromise yourself for the next opportunity you might get, or you should never compromise yourself for, I've got to get this credit or I've got to whatever. Talk to your advisor, talk to someone at school, figure that out. But I would say, there's not a ton of horrendous experiences out there. Some of them aren't great, but again, see what else you can do. See if you can ask a lot of questions about like, hey, this seems a little disorganized. Is there a way I could help more? See if you can make, lemons into lemonade or whatever the saying is. So, but you can learn a lot about what not to do as much as you can learn about what to do.
Anna?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Pam was just saying about learning what not to do. I didn't have a terrible internship, but I had a not interesting internship that helped me understand what I didn't want to do with my life. And so before I went to work as a clerk at the Miami Herald, I had an internship in the sort of corporate communications department of a big utility. And people were very nice, and it was a very beautiful place to work. But I quickly understood that it was not for me. It was very conformist. It was boring. I would finish what it was that I was supposed to do in an hour, and then I had a long stretch of the day that I had to fill. And I was very constrained in what I could write. And I was only 20 years old, but at some point I had this sort of existential crisis where I thought, is this going to be my life, making money for this utility? And so, no shade on the people who choose that kind of life, because, you do get a lot out of it and you are performing a public service. But for me, I knew that it wasn't the right career for me. And so that I knew that I did not want to be into corporate communications, hopefully not in anything having to do with public relations, again, for me and for mine. And that's a really important thing. So I wouldn't call that internship a waste or you know, mistake, because I got to learn in a really direct way kind of job that wasn't for me. And as a side benefit of that, I had thought I was going to be into corporate law. That was my next step. And one of my very wonderful colleagues there said, "Oh, you want to be a corporate lawyer? Why don't we go and visit the corporate lawyers and see what they do?" And I said, that was another lesson that I didn't for that either. So there is a lot to learn. You know, take all the internships that you can. Do make sure they're paid. This one paid very nicely. And then take the lesson that it gives you. Sometimes the lesson will be, this is not for you, and that's a valuable one.
Yeah.
So I would like to add, when it comes to mentorship and what I would consider to be a great quality of a mentor and leader in a workspace, I would have to say it's someone who makes you believe in yourself, and makes you feel value and added to. That's hard to come by. I'm 22 years old, and like, I don't have as much experience, but I've been in a lot of places and I've had a lot of different work experiences, and it's hard to come by people who know how to treat people well in this world, because we're so individualistic. So if you find someone or a mentor leader who wants to add to you and give value to you, I would say that's an invaluable experience, whether it's paid or not. I will use my internship at the University Press as an example. And I've told them this, that was one of the best experiences I've ever had, because they always wanted to know what I was thinking. They always valued what I said, and they never made me feel less than. So not only the individuals, but the space and the environment that you're working in should make you feel good about yourself and the work that you're doing.
Thank you. We do have another question by Liz Rose Hall. For those panelists who teach, do you have any thoughts or advice about teaching today, particularly in the state public university system? And it's a broad question, but maybe Anna, can I call on you because you are teaching?
My students are the best part of my job, and I have always loved teaching. And I find that it's one of the great privileges. And in talking to students about their work, I'm learning more about what it means to communicate, what it means to write, why we do this, what is art. And it's in that conversation, you know, that dialogue that we approach truth, right? And that we approach beauty and all the other abstracts that we want to approach in the humanities, or endeavoring always to approach. You know, so that's preeminent for me. And there's a lot of noise in Florida right now surrounding public education. There's a lot of pressures that we're under. And I try to make those subservient to the actual work that I do in the classroom, and to concentrate on that, to concentrate on the individuals that I work with on a semester to semester basis. And when I do that, I find that my own anxieties are eased. It's almost a selfish approach. All the while working where I can, you know, to make sure that I'm continue to live in a state that I want to live in, and that I want to be part of, and that I want to contribute. And those pressures are very real. And we're going through a time when we really need to be paying attention.
Thank you. I want Tim to talk a little bit more about work in the archives, and there is a specific question. University presses often publish books by scholars who do immense work in the archives, like the Meek-Eaton archives. Those books are one way in which readers and the public interact with archives. What are some of the other ways in which you and other archivists engage in the engage with the public? But I would also like to ask engage scholars. So what are the ways in which you engage with the public and with scholars from the perspective of an archivist?
Well, you know, it's very important, and it's good to segue from Anna Menendez's thought in terms of teaching. I'm finding out more and more, and we all are finding out more and more, that museum and archives are becoming the truth tellers in the society that we are in now. we found that we have become more and more important to telling that primary source story. You can hear about the source when you talk about the massacre, the Odessa massacre. You know, these things are very important with engaging our public. And we have to find ways through the research that people come and do. We have professors. When I was in Miami, I had professors, well, actually students working on their dissertations, was using the archives a lot. You know, Dr. Nathan Connolly books, A World More Concrete. Chanel Rose was doing a story. And what I found ways to do is to engage them by allowing them to get into collections that are closed. And the way that we worked on a deal to do it is that they would process the collection while they did their research. So I kind of found a way to engage people by allowing them to get into these collections and dive in and to tell those stories that are untold. Ways that we kind of engage people today is making history relevant. I did teach, not here at Florida A&M, but I taught at Florida Memorial University prior to me coming here, and I would find ways to make the stories relevant and ways to connect those stories, past stories, to coming stories. You know, I had a professor, Dr. Dula Hemingway, would say there's nothing new under the sun. You know, and that's true because I've read headlines after headlines in the archives when I first started as an intern. For example, I was processing the Miami Times, which is one of the largest Black periodicals in the country that still exists. And as I was processing that collection, I saw a headline from the 1940s saying, or 1950s saying, Overtown will be redeveloped. Came back to the 1960s, that same headline, Overtown will be redeveloped. 1970s, I see Ms. Mendez shaking her head because she's down there. She kind of knows the same headline was happening every decade. And what that did for me as an archive is show that there's nothing new under the sun. If it wasn't for the archives, we wouldn't know that you've been saying that Overtown was going to be redeveloped for the last 50 to 60 years, you know? So that's what make archives important, make it relevant, tying it to today's time. There's actions that are happening today that really is similar to things that have happened in the past. I always quote the late Reverend Laurie when he said, if you don't know where you come from, you will never know when they're trying to take you back. So trying to unveil those stories through oral histories, through these collections from community archives, university archives, and making them relevant, finding ways to digitize it like Ms. Thompson said, and getting it available online is very key and critical to battling these issues of people trying to change these stories from being history to his or her story.
Thank you. I just want to say that I have the very deepest appreciation of archivists right now because I had such a good experience this past summer with them doing so much work for me. So I'm very deeply appreciative of the work that's being done in archives. But we do have a very specific question for Anna, a follow-up question, how to find writing internships.
That is a good question, because as I said, when I was leaving college in 91, 92, there were a lot more opportunities with newspapers, at least remunerative opportunities, right? It seems like there's almost boundless opportunities now to write, that they don't pay or they pay very little or it's gig work or piecemeal. And so I would say, you know, start, as somebody mentioned earlier, start with where you're at, start with the institution where you are and with your professors. You know, I'm, you know, especially with the Smithsonian Public Humanities Lab, which I'm affiliated with, there's always internships coming up, and they may not be billed as writing internships, but so much of the work in the humanities will involve writing. And you can always approach these institutions on your own campus. And, you know, don't wait for a posting. A lot of times you can go somewhere and say, hey, you know, I'd like to get some experience with writing or, you know, with researching. Do you have any need? Can I work with you? And there's a lot of opportunities. If you go to the career services of your university, we have a wonderful one at FIU, and I feel that students don't even know about it sometimes. go there, they'll give you an assessment, they'll pull up these wonderful databases of opportunities for you. And you can also probably access those in a lot of places as an alumni also. And the other thing is to stay on good terms with your professors, right, if you're a student, with your colleagues. Every job that I've ever had, with the exception of 1 or 2, have been through friends who have reached out, right, and who have helped me. And, keep those networks alive, not in an instrumentalist way, but because it's nice. Somebody wants to spread networking to me as profession friendliness. And I think that's a wonderful way to think about it, right? Stay friendly with your network. And, ask Ron, you're looking for a job, let's connect, right? And then people will know when something comes up to do that. And, that's, again, it depends on where you find yourself, because if you're outside the university, then you'll have to work a little bit harder to find those writing gigs. And I have friends who are doing that, and they will go on Facebook and say, I'm looking for a writing gig, somebody please help me. And people do.
So we have 2 more questions in the Q&A, I think, or maybe even 3, but I think 2. So we're going to make those the last 2 questions. And the first one, I will actually take a stab at and then invite Anna to join me. So what is the likelihood of being able to return to academia as a professor after starting a non-academic career post-PhD? I've seen some universities say that they will only hire people who have received their degree in the last 5 years. And I would say that's field specific. And I think that Anna maybe can speak to that with an MFA and publishing experience. Then of course your value goes up. And the same in my field, I would say for film production, of course, if you have made films, your expertise is increased for an academic position. However, if you're, let's say, in film history, and you're really a professor who's based on publications, and that is the way in which your profile is evaluated. If you're out of field for maybe 10, 15 years, and you don't have any publications and your PhD is 10, 15 years old, I think it is unlikely that you will be hired. And I will say that the academic job market is such that that timeline is really crucial. So I think people and I will say this, even outside of academia, I think once you apply, people who look at CVs or resumes want to see that you have been active in some way. And obviously I also advise my former students, and they try to apply for positions, and there's nothing that has changed on their CV in the last even 3 years. I say, what did you do? Because I know you did something, but that you have to show that. So I hope that it's a little bit totally to the question, a little bit off, because it's the in general question, how do you show that you're engaged in some way with what is your passion? But Anna, did you want to add something to that?
I really don't have anything much to add, Barbara. I think that I agree 100% with that. The main point being stay active, stay publishing, stay part of the conversation. And that's, I had colleagues at Maastricht University. I had a colleague in particular who took a time off, 10 years, in fact, to care for his children because his wife was not able to do so. And he was publishing throughout that time. And that allowed him to return to academia because he had that track record.
Mm-hmm. So our last question comes from Ash, and it's open to everybody, but maybe especially Jenna. What advice and recommendations would you give to someone who's graduating and interested in getting into publishing?
So a couple different things, and some of them I already said, do an internship if you can, reach out to people who are working in the field and talk to them. People have been, surprisingly generous with their time and with their insight. And then I would also say, there's a lot of good resources out there if you're looking specifically at, university presses, academic publishing. AU Presses is like a consortium of university presses. And they have, a lot of great resources. They have a job board, they have, like you can, find people there if you need to make connections. You can like look up book jobs online. You can follow kind of the news in the publishing industry if you want to get newsletters from Publishers Weekly, American Booksellers Association, Shelf Awareness, Publishers Lunch. There's like a lot of, information out there that you can kind of start following, start seeing what the industry is like. And that would kind of be my step one, I guess.
Yes, and as we invite Romy to come back, obviously there's internships at this press, and Chiara is a great example of somebody who did it. We also collaborate with the press. We have one through the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere as well. So that's another way to start.
Yes, and there are always many opportunities out there. You just have to be looking for them. Pam just showed us the magazine at the beginning of her talk. So there are writing opportunities in places everywhere. You just have to be on the lookout for them. So thank you to our moderator, Barber and Mennel, and to each of our panelists for sharing your experiences with us. To our attendees, if you are a student or if you work with students and are interested in hearing about future internship opportunities at the University Press of Florida, click the link in the chat to sign up. Some of our panelists may also have additional opportunities for students at their workplaces, museums, other institutions. So we will provide some of those links in the email that all registrants will receive next week. I also want to thank the UF African American Studies program, the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere for partnering with the University Press of Florida on this event. And thanks to the National Endowment for the Humanities for making this event possible through its grant program, Sustaining the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan. A recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, Florida Press. A link to the recording will be sent to all registrants next week. On our YouTube channel, you can also view a recording of the first two events in this series, African Diasporic Arts and Social Change, and Race, Environment, Culture, and Political Ecology across the Americas. Thank you for attending and have a wonderful weekend.